In the shadows of society, where law dissolves and morality becomes currency, empires have risen, not built on innovation or progress, but on addiction, violence, and human suffering. This is the story of the drug cartels, organizations that grew from street corners into billion-dollar criminal enterprises that would challenge governments, corrupt nations, and leave millions of lives destroyed in their wake. Tonight, we trace the rise of the most powerful criminal organizations the world has ever seen. From the poppy fields of the Golden Triangle to the cocaine laboratories hidden deep in the Colombian jungle, from the streets of Medellin to the border towns of Mexico, this is a story of power, greed, and the devastating cost of the global drug trade. Pause. The rise of drug cartels, empires of shadow. Slight pause. The seeds of empire. To understand how cartels rose to unimaginable power, we must first travel back to the 1960s and 70s, an era of social revolution, countercultural movements, and a surging demand for recreational drugs in the United States and Europe. As marijuana and cocaine became symbols of rebellion and escape, demand skyrocketed. And where there is demand, supply will always find a way. The geography was perfect. South America, particularly Colombia, possessed the ideal climate for cultivating coca plants, the raw material for cocaine. To the north, the United States represented the world's largest consumer market, with millions of potential customers and billions of dollars waiting to be made. In the city of Medellin, Colombia, a new breed of criminal was emerging. They weren't street thugs or petty smugglers, they were businessmen, entrepreneurs of the underworld, and the most infamous among them was Pablo Escobar. Born into poverty in 1949, Escobar began his criminal career stealing tombstones and selling contraband cigarettes. But he possessed something dangerous: ambition without limits, intelligence without conscience, and a willingness to use extreme violence to achieve his goals. By the late 1970s, Escobar and his associates had formed the Medellin Cartel, a sophisticated criminal organization that would revolutionize the drug trade. They didn't just sell drugs, they created an entire industry. From coca cultivation to processing, from transportation networks to distribution channels, they controlled every step of the supply chain. Slight pause. Tone shifts darker, more intense. Blood and empire. Power in the cartel world was maintained by one principle: terror. Escobar's motto was simple: plata o plomo, silver or lead, accept the bribe or accept the bullet. Between 1984 and 1993, the Medellin cartel waged war against the Colombian government. They assassinated presidential candidates, Supreme Court justices, over 1,000 police officers, and bombed commercial airliners. They murdered journalists who dared to expose them. They kidnapped, tortured, and killed anyone who stood in their way. Entire communities lived in fear. Medellin became the murder capital of the world, with over 6,000 homicides in 1991 alone. The cartel had transformed a vibrant city into a war zone. But the violence wasn't contained to Colombia. As cartels expanded their operations, they corrupted entire governments. In Panama, General Manuel Noriega became a key ally, allowing cartels to launder billions through Panamanian banks. In Mexico, corrupt officials looked the other way as drugs flowed north. Pause. The fall of Medellin and the rise of Cali. By the early 1990s, the Colombian government, backed by the United States, intensified their campaign against Escobar. The hunt consumed years and vast resources. On December 2, 1993, Pablo Escobar was located in a middle-class Medellin neighborhood. In a rooftop shootout with Colombian police, the world's most wanted drug lord was killed. He was 44 years old. Many celebrated. They believed the war was over. They were wrong. While the world focused on Escobar's violence, a more sophisticated organization had been quietly building power in the city of Cali. The Cali cartel, led by the Rodriguez Oruela brothers and Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, operated differently. They called themselves the Gentlemen of Cali. They bribed rather than bombed. They infiltrated rather than invaded. They dressed in expensive suits and operated from corporate offices. They invested in legitimate businesses and corrupted the system from within. But by 1996, through intense pressure from the DEA and Colombian authorities, the Cali cartel's leaders were arrested. Another empire had fallen. Slight pause. The Mexican Dominion. For decades, Mexican trafficking groups had served merely as transporters, the middlemen who moved Colombian cocaine across the U.S. border. But with Colombian cartels in disarray, the Mexicans saw an opportunity. The Sinaloa cartel, led by the legendary Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, rose to become the most powerful drug trafficking organization in history. Unlike their predecessors, they diversified, not just cocaine, but heroin, methamphetamine, marijuana, and synthetic opioids. Their innovation was remarkable. They built sophisticated tunnel systems beneath the U.S.-Mexico border, some over a mile long, complete with lighting, ventilation, and rail systems. They constructed semi-submersible submarines. They used drones, catapults, and even aircraft. But they also brought unprecedented violence. Rival cartels, the Gulf Cartel, Los Zetas, the Juarez Cartel, the Tijuana Cartel, waged brutal wars for territory. Between 2006 and 2020, over 250,000 people were murdered in Mexico due to cartel violence. Entire towns were abandoned. Politicians, journalists, and police were executed by the hundreds. Deeper, more urgent tone. The opioid catastrophe. As we entered the 21st century, a new chapter in the drug crisis was written, not in jungle laboratories or desert tunnels, but in American doctors' offices and pharmaceutical boardrooms. In the 1990s, pharmaceutical companies assured the medical community that patients would not become addicted to prescription opioid pain relievers. Healthcare providers began prescribing them at greater rates, and millions of Americans became dependent. By 2012, American doctors were writing over 250 million opioid prescriptions annually, enough for every adult in the country to have their own bottle. But when prescriptions ran out or became too expensive, addicted individuals sought alternatives, and the cartels were ready with a cheaper, more potent substitute: heroin. Mexican cartels rapidly expanded heroin production. By 2017, over 90% of heroin in the United States came from Mexico. But even heroin would soon be overshadowed by something far more deadly: fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. Originally developed for cancer patients, it became the cartel's most profitable product. Cartels began manufacturing fentanyl using precursor chemicals imported from China. It was cheap to produce, easy to smuggle due to its potency, and devastatingly addictive. The results were catastrophic. In 2021 alone, over 107,000 Americans died from drug overdoses, more than 70,000 involving fentanyl. That's nearly 300 people dying every single day, more Americans than were killed in the entire Vietnam War, dying in a single year. Slight pause. The global reach. Today, drug cartels operate on a scale that rivals multinational corporations. The global illegal drug trade is estimated at over $600 billion annually, larger than the GDP of most countries. Cocaine floods into Europe through African transit countries. Methamphetamine spreads across Asia and Australia. Heroin from Afghanistan's poppy fields feeds addiction in Russia and Europe. Cartels have evolved into sophisticated transnational criminal enterprises. They launder money through cryptocurrency, real estate, and legitimate businesses. They employ accountants, lawyers, and cybersecurity experts. But perhaps their most insidious power is economic. In regions with few employment opportunities, cartels offer money, status, and protection. They recruit the desperate, the young, the impoverished, turning victims of circumstance into perpetrators of violence. Empathetic, reflective tone. The human cost. Behind every